But under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, Russia is permitted to do this. So everybody out there saying that this is an unprovoked act of aggression by Russia just simply doesn't know the history. The history is quite clear. So now Russia did this, but they came in soft because Russia doesn't want to go to war against the Ukrainians. They didn't want to do this. They view the Ukrainians as their brothers. You know, here in the West, in the United States, we don't understand it. We bought into the propaganda. We're like, no, them Russians hate them Ukrainians. They just want to fight and all that stuff. That's just not true. This war is breaking the heart and soul of the Russian people because they view the Ukrainian people as their brothers. They don't have a problem with Ukrainian people. They have a problem with the Nazis that we've empowered. And remember, when I say Nazis, I really mean it. These are Nazis. These aren't wannabes. These aren't fakes. I mean, just imagine if people paraded down the streets of the United States wearing the robes of the Ku Klux Klan, burning the cross with all the symbology of it, and I said, those are Klansmen. They go, no, they're not. Those aren't Klansmen. You can't call them. Sure, I can. That's the KKK. They look like a duck, walk like a duck, quack like a duck. They are a duck. The Ukrainians are Nazis, the Ukrainian government. And, you know, this is just an outright statement of fact. So, you know, there's a war against these Nazis going on. Russia is against them, but they're not against the Ukrainian people. And again, how Russia promoted peace. Russia was pushing for a negotiated settlement almost immediately after this war began. The war began on February 24th. By March 3rd, the Russians were already engaged in, I think even earlier than that, were engaged in negotiations to bring this conflict to an end. They had 3 negotiations between early March and March 6th that set down the conditions. On April 1st, they were scheduled to meet in Istanbul for a final peace agreement, that an agreement would be signed. And part of that, to set that agreement up, Russia carried out what was called a confidence building measure. They withdrew from huge amounts of Ukrainian territory, saying, see, we're not here to take your territory. We're withdrawing. Now let's sign the peace treaty. And what happened? The United States and NATO bullied the Ukrainians into backing out. In fact, the Ukrainian head of the Ukrainian intelligence service has pretty much said, we weren't negotiating in good faith. This was just designed to buy time. For what? Well, what happened in May? NATO, the United States, voted a new Lend-Lease Act, $40 billion worth of American taxpayer money used for military assistance, where we enabled the Ukrainians to build up a new military, and then they attacked the Russians. And they had some success. They drove the Russians out of Kharkov. They captured the right bank of Kherson. But in doing so, they changed the nature of the conflict. This stopped being Russia versus Ukraine. And this became Russia versus NATO. And now FAFO. Fool around, find out. There's an old Russian saying, and I butcher it sometimes. I've had my Russian friends correct me, but the Russians are slow to harness, but fast to ride. And what that means is, just imagine you got some big old stallion in the field and you want to get moving, but he don't want to play. He wants to eat grass, chase mares, do whatever stallions do. Okay. But it takes you a little bit of time to put the harness on him. He's fighting, he's struggling, doesn't want to do it. But now you got the harness on, he's ready to rock. He's going to take you down that road. The Russians didn't want to put on the harness of war. They didn't want this. They had a limited objective, a special military operation, but NATO and Ukraine turned it into the NATO conflict that Russia was trying to avoid from the very beginning, since the Minsk Accords. Now Russia's harnessed, and they're going for a ride. And that ride is this offensive. 300,000 men were mobilized. Another 180,000 so volunteers were brought in and trained. Some of the most modern equipment coming out of Russian factories has been used to equip these forces. Meanwhile, this NATO Ukrainian army has been ground down into nothing. I mean, some of the death figures coming out are just mind-boggling. Let's just remind your audience, in the 10 years of Vietnam, we lost some 58,000 Americans. And it broke our heart, broke our spirit. 58,000 in 10 years. During the height of the Vietnam conflict, we were suffering, say, 200, 220 dead a week. And it crushed us as a nation. Ukrainians in less than a year have suffered anywhere ranging from 157,000 dead to over 300,000 dead. In the entire World War II, America lost 300,000 dead. The entire World War II, that's against Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and everything else in between, 300,000 dead. The Ukrainians probably have lost that or more in less than a year in fighting against the Russians. If this doesn't